Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for showing up. My name is Jimmy Albrecht. I'm a retired NYPD Captain and also a retired police chief that worked for the State Department in Serbia. I worked for the United Nations Police and the European Union Police. I've been asked to talk about the contemporary and future challenges for law enforcement. Obviously, there's a lot of hot topics involved here, and I'll try to cover them one by one because there's definitely issues that should be addressed. If you're a police executive, you're a police leader, if you're a sheriff, you really want to think about these issues and figure out what your policy procedure, what your position is going to be when you're looking at these issues. I'll first talk about the recent history in policing that we have here in America. I talked about different eras. We spoke about two eras originally: the reactive, historic era that ended probably in 1980, and the community policing era. But now we've been through a lot of different types of transitions since then. In 1995, following the community policing era, we see that the development of pretty much a technological approach to policing. We do crime analysis. It's pretty basic. It has to do with basically with crime mapping, but when we started this, it was physical maps with pins in it and so on. Now obviously you have these advanced programs, but it became very effective. Before it was randomized control, now it's target control. Put police officers in hotspots, make sure they're addressing the distinct problems in the community, and with the whole goal of actually making crime go down. Again, a new phenomenon, but in reality, it actually was very effective. It started in 1994 in the NYPD, and I can tell you, in the first year alone, crime went down 50%. That's after the crime rate consistently went up higher. And now talking up to at least 5 years ago, the crime rate was down 92%. Unfortunately, there's a new political atmosphere there. Pretty much it's restrained the police from engaging in really effective proactive enforcement. But when that model was in place, this technologically advanced, enhanced policing style, targeting at hotspots with a broken window, zero tolerance perspective, it had a dramatic impact on the police. Now, unfortunately, we moved on probably 5 years ago, in 2014, excuse me, we have a complete change. Now you can call it the anti-police era. Pretty much since Ferguson, since the Garner incident in New York City, now it's the George Floyd incident last year, there's been a move to actually counter the proactive efforts of the police and stop their direct engagement with criminal suspects, partly because there was a racial dynamic to it that targeted mainly minorities, or at least the accusations were targeted mainly minorities. And the issue with that, though, is that as the police withdrew their proactive enforcement, what happened to the violence crime? What happened to the serious crime rate in America? It went up dramatically again. We can see, just looking at what's the hot topic on all the news, the crime rate in America. What's the hot topic in the news again? The murder rate and so on. How are we going to address that? We really have to go back. We have to really find a balance between community policing, which was really public outreach, an effort to build up trust in the community, direct public engagement, direct public participation in prioritizing what the police were doing, and going back to a more proactive enforcement model so that the public really understood what cops are doing out there, that it was actually for the good of the community, that actually was driven to reduce crime. And it did have a dramatic effect, as I mentioned before. That dramatic crime rate from 1994 to about 2014 actually went down in America universally between 60 and 90%, which is pretty dramatic. As I mentioned before, this anti-police movement is obviously a hot topic. Defund the police is the new term that's out there. Dramatic impact on police morale, and I like to talk about the personal prioritizations of police officers. It's not as simple as a scale of justice, which is good versus bad, or sufficient evidence to convict, balanced against not insufficient evidence and so on to prove guilt, to a very complex scale, multifaceted, where police officer, police leaders have to balance different things. It's not just before where you prioritize your job and crime reduction. It's loyalty to the criminal justice system, loyalty to the community, loyalty to your bosses, loyalty to your colleagues, and loyalty to yourself and your family. And I think that's now taken the top priority with cops. They're looking at, I don't want to get myself in a situation where I may get arrested, where my family may come under scrutiny, I may come under scrutiny, I may lose my pension and so on. I'm going to step back. My loyalty is now to myself and to my family rather than to the community at large, which really is a disservice to the public out there in the communities across America. When we're talking about officer-involved shootings, obviously that's a hot topic too, and there's a lot of issues that police leaders have to really address. I was fortunate to work on the ICB model policy that examined the investigation of officer-involved shootings, and really police commanders have to have an answer. I mean, obviously officer-involved shootings are unexpected. That can happen anywhere in America, from the biggest police department like New York City to Maricotta County Sheriff's Office and so on. How are you going to address these issues? And there's a few main issues that have to be addressed. One of them is, number one, because of the impact of the negative social media and traditional media that goes out there, you've got to come up with a very quick public statement outlining what happened at the event. And I can tell you from evaluating police shootings for the last 15 years, 99% of the time that police shooting was justified, clearly justified. But you got to make it clear. Unfortunately, the position that most police commanders took was, hey, you know what? My public statement's going to be, we'll wait till the investigation is done and release the facts. You can't do that anymore. Because you actually have to counter the misinformation that's being put out there by social and traditional media. So my recommendation would be within 24 hours there has to be some type of media event where you're extending the facts, you're releasing photos of someone to justify, but truthfully justify why that shooting took place and so on. Because if not, you're going to let the misinformation kind of control the scenario. What about releasing the video? Are you going to release the video to the public? There's no yes or no answer to that. The one steady factor is, what does the prosecutor have to say about it? You have a prosecutor doing a criminal investigation, you have to ask him, is it okay for us to release the video? Because that may endanger his criminal investigation. So you want to do that. You want to do that, with the cooperation of the prosecutor and the other entities that are actually investigating the incident. What about releasing the police officer names? What we find out now, people didn't know where you lived. You were involved in a shooting. You were an anonymous white or black police officer that worked for an agency. Now they know your name relatively quickly. Someone is actually Googling the internet, getting your home address, posting it somewhere. The next thing you know, you have agitators, demonstrators in front of your house, endangering both you and your family. How are you going to address that? You got to worry about officer safety. In addition to the physiological, emotional impact that police shooting has had on that officer himself too, his medical care. And then one of the big issues is who's going to investigate that shooting? Because you want to be as transparent as possible and enhance the confidence in the investigation, the public confidence in the investigation. I think the correct model would be to look at an independent agency to do it, whether it's the state police, the State Bureau of Investigation. But you want to get somebody out there that's properly trained and qualified to come in, conduct a thorough criminal investigation, and then report the facts to the prosecutor involved so they can get this done. Media relations, again, because of this anti-police or generally anti-police environment out there, your public information officer has to be a key individual, somebody who can talk competently to the public, convey a positive message. And what you really want to do is, obviously you got to address the negatively covered, or let's call it a negative incident, where or one that's called under criticism, like a police shooting or police use of force, and counter that with all the good things that police officers do out there in America. Cops are doing tremendous things. They're helping people left and right. You hear about cops collecting money for crime victims and so on, or the children of crime victims. Get those positive stories out there too, to paint the police in a positive light, because it seems to be that between the misinformation and the anti-police sentiment, you're not getting that message out there. When you talk about developing leadership in policing, I spoke to some of the police executives here at the conference, and one thing they said is that a lot of their supervisors lack the proper leadership qualities in order to make a proper decision. You really have to make sure that your police command staff, and I would even say all front lines staff, get some type of leadership training. I ask my students pretty regularly, is a police officer at the scene of a car accident, is he a leader? And people will tell you, no, he's just a cop. No, he's not. He's directing a critical incident that's very traumatic to these participants in there. So he's got to have the proper leadership training too. So leadership training should be pretty much prolific throughout the agency. But your frontline staff are the key personnel in actually leading their colleagues and subordinates, but also making major decisions as far as evaluating personnel. You talk about negative incidents. Again, we spoke about the fact that 99.8% of all police shootings turn out to be criminally justified, legally justified, and so on. Same thing with cops. When you look at police officers engaged in serious misconduct, criminality, and corruption, most people will tell you that it's endemic in policing. When in fact, when you look at it statistically, and we're talking about going back 3 or 4 decades, traditionally or consistently they found out that it's 1% or less. Usually about 0.5% of all police officers engaged in this type of unacceptable behavior. But you have to weed them out, and that's why you need these proper frontline supervisors, effectively trained in leadership, to make these calls and say, hey, look, I got to document these trends this cop has, so we get him out of the agency as quickly as possible. But again, with the acknowledgement that 99% plus of cops are actually doing a proper job. One thing you might want to read, if you get a chance, is a book written by James Collins called From Good to Great, and the Justice Department actually wrote a manual based on the Good to Great book by James Collins to apply to law enforcement. If you take a look at it, it tells you how to develop effective leaders, how to pick your team, and how to re-engineer your department to point them in a new positive direction. Crisis planning and response obviously is a major thing. We're not just talking about officer bomb shootings. We're talking about any event that's out there that's critical. It could be a major train accident, it could be a terrorist attack, it could be a mass casualty event. You have to be properly prepared for that. What I tell people, again, is to make sure in advance you have some type of critical incident management plan. And in that plan should be a number of very pre-identified issues. Number one, who are the important leaders in your community? What are the critical locations outside in your community? Gun stores, medical sites, are there any sensitive locations like religious locations? Where the political leaders lead? Do you have contact information for community leaders out there, whether they're clerics, religious clerics, or whether they're community leaders, even if they're critics of the police? You want to be able to outreach to them as quickly as possible to get a message out on what the factual information is, so they can get it out to their constituents and the community members. But it's something that you got to get done in there. And what you also want to know is who is your team that you want involved in a crisis event, because not everybody is as reliable as the next or as competent as the next. And you got to know who you want there, even if you can call them in from home, should anything happen, because usually these critical events last for days. Another thing, because of the budget cuts, when you hear this defund the police, it's not a new phenomenon. Police budgets have been cut consistently since about 2005. How do we actually deal with that? And one avenue to do is to employ volunteers. Now, there's different levels of volunteers. Not necessarily getting a volunteer to come in and carry a gun and enforce the law. That takes a lot of actually training and input into getting that person to the standards they should be at. And the recommended standards is if you're going to employ someone as like a police reserve or police auxiliary who's armed and has enforcement powers, they should essentially get the same amount of training that a police officer gets in the field. But there's other volunteers that could do your phone response at the police station. They can do filing. Obviously, everybody's got to be vetted, but you can vet at different levels based on the responsibilities that they have. So the use of police volunteers is actually an effective force multiplier. Officer wellness is obviously a major issue. It's been around, it's something that's been neglected by the police community at least till 2000, 2001. It's been acknowledged after the 9/11 attacks that PTS and PTSD and and so on are a real phenomenon that affect cops. And this whole issue of cumulative stress, traumatic stress or exposure, wears and tears on police officers, and so on. How are you going to address that? That's something that has to be acknowledged. There have to be different avenues for getting police officers assistance, not necessarily through the organization, but maybe independently. You might want to work with the Fraternal Order Police, the collective bargaining agencies, and even with medical groups to find out if they have the opportunity to come in and actually have volunteers, so people can talk. Cops who may not want to, may not feel comfortable talking to organizational personnel, may feel very good in talking to an independent counselor or cleric to kind of get things off their mind. But it's something that talking to somebody, getting that counseling, getting that assistance, kind of blowing off steam, actually helps someone to maintain proper mental and emotional health. I guess I'll wrap up with this. Public policing started in about 1828 in London, and it was developed by one of the officials. His name was Sir Robert Peel, and he identified 9 basic principles that apply to policing. Most people have never read it, but if you read those principles, there's one thing that's common in pretty much every principle. It's public approval, public involvement, and public support. So if you're going to engage in policing activities, you want to make sure that they're involved. Community policing is a great model. I think you're going to see a return to at least some form of community policing here under the new presidential administration. But it's a great model to get in there and allow the public to provide feedback, provide input, and even actually identify the priorities that the police and the community should address, or maybe not address, whether we agree with it or not. 2 more things that I want to address, if I may. Dealing with the mentally ill. We see with officer-involved shootings that about 14% of our shootings officially, probably a higher number, you're dealing with someone who has a mental illness. But our encounters with the mental illness often involve in the use of physical force, the deadly physical force. Can that be prevented? What model are we going to go to? The CIT model, which is the use of a collaborated team with police and mental health professionals, whether it's a nurse or a social worker or maybe a psychologist going out in the field, talking to these subjects and trying to get them assistance. They have a better understanding of their behaviors and so on. That seems to be one model. The other model might be that to treat mentally ill as purely a medical issue and have make it an EMS priority, where they go there. Now that the police aren't there, they would actually call in if there's a need for some type of extra security, that they would come in and the EMS would actually have the police come in to provide extra security. But since we're not well versed, meaning the police are not well versed in identifying some mental health challenges, it may be best to actually make it a medical issue. So we'll have to see how that transpires. The last thing again is the threat of domestic terrorism in America. It doesn't matter what political affiliation you have, there are the radical elements on both the right and the left that engage in violence and property damage, vandalism, and so on. How are you going to counter that? How are you going to address it? Is your intelligence capacity capable of actually tracking that, getting effective intelligence beforehand? And then what are your riot control measures going to be? Because unfortunately, the traditional ones we use come under a lot of scrutiny, whether it's from the public, from minority group leaders, or from the ACLU. Maybe we have to take a look and see what other strategies are in place for effective resolution to these issues. So I thank you for your attention. I tried to cover as many important issues as I could, and I appreciate you spending the time listening. Thank you very much, and have a good day.